Okay, so now let's look at the people in our teens' lives and the impact they're having. This is going to be shorter, briefer, but let's look at this for just a minute. Adults, how much influence do adults have? Adolescence is certainly a time when peers sort of win out, but it doesn't mean, and we can tend to think, that adults don't have an important role in their lives. But because those who feel a connection to adults in one way or another tend to be less likely to use drugs, quit school, break the law, or hurt themselves. So what I would say, we talked about kind of that self-righting mechanism in babies. I see this a lot in teenagers, that especially if there is a deficit at home, or just that they're feeling not as comfortable maybe talking to their parents, and even if they're fabulous parents, but whatever, that they're having a hard time, that a lot of teens still seek out adult connection, whether it be through coaches, other parents. Now, the parents of friends can sometimes be thought of to be so much cooler than our own, and they seek them out, or club, advisors in terms of at high school yearbook, about whatever it is, outside of school, instructors, as I said, coaches. So I do think that they seek out adult connection, hopefully. And if they can have at least some positive adult connection, that's a good thing for them, in general. So, and studies seem to show that. Although teenagers may act as if they no longer need their parents' neglect, can be very destructive. A lot of that's pretty obvious, I would think. Family relationships. What's most important in family relationships? So let's look at 4 aspects of closeness. Communication. Do parents and teens talk openly with one another? So what is communication like? Do they have communication? Support. Do they rely on each other? Does the teen feel supported? Are they also given a role of support in the family? Are they seeing this as something that goes both ways by that time? Connectedness. How emotionally close are they? Do they feel safe to both communicate? And connectedness can create that feeling of safety to communicate. Control. Do parents encourage or limit adolescent autonomy? I felt in some ways like my mom gave me a lot of autonomy when I was younger, and then as soon as I went off to college, somehow I got curfews that were shorter. It was kind of funny. But but how are we as parents dealing with this desire for our young people to leave the oatmeal house? Sometimes this is hard on parents. They see this as their last thread before their children are gone from them into the world. And at the same time, the children are pulling on that thread to go. So sometimes it's parents that are pulling them back, and sometimes there's just this back and forth between the two. Parental monitoring. So this is just knowing where your child is, what they're doing, who they're with, having them check in. So this can be positive when there is a relationship with high communication, good support, and good connection. It can be negative in one that is overly restrictive and too controlling. So it can be positive when it's part of an authoritative style, and negative when it's a continued part of an authoritarian style, I guess this would say. So you can think about or look at, so for example, if you're doing this for a letter for adolescents, what did it look like for you? Communication, support, connectedness, and control. There's 4 aspects of closeness within a family. Okay, so you can ask the question, are there any noticeable differences in relationships with adults based on differing cultures? So in every culture, adolescents benefit from increasing autonomy, but some cultures allow more than others. They tend to benefit, I guess, maybe if we're looking at overall health, but what cultures value are going to be different. Again, there's going to be many cultures that really value interrelatedness, and so autonomy is not going to be. So what is this going to look like for teens, and how is this going to impact them? If they stay within their cultures and they are good with that, and that's how cultures continue, right? We uphold the values of the cultures before us. This can cause friction, definitely, if we change cultures, if we move between cultures. But you can think about this. When I think about this, I think about like my friends. I had, interesting, but it was true. I had a lot of Italian friends for some reason. When I grew up, my best friend was Italian. My two best friends were Italian. I knew other Italian people, but people I spent a lot of time with. My mom always said I should have been Italian. I love Italian food. And, but definitely different home dynamics, right? In terms of the way they expressed their closeness or their support for one another. And so I don't know, you can just think about that. And did it look differently among people that you knew? Okay, let's see what else. So peers. There's a lot more that you can read about all of that. I'm just kind of hitting some highlights. Peers. In what ways are peers a positive influence? Because we always think about peer pressure, but is there peer power? Do peers, peer pressure can be positive in terms of positive influencing. Friends generally encourage socially desirable behaviors. It always shows up when it's negative. But if you have the friend that can, that says, hey, let's join this club, or when they're kind of pushing to study or do better in a test or to take a higher level class or things like that, then that's going to be positive influence and pressure. Oh my, hold on. But of course, too, there is going to be peer pressure. That's negative. We can call, deviancy training, destructive peer support in which one person shows another how to rebel. Come on, hey, let's skip class today. Hey, let's, come on, drink. Let's go out. Let's try to buy a 6-pack with our fake IDs or whatever. Approval for risk taking. And this is hard. Again, we don't want to get eaten. We want to fit in. We are also driven at some extent to, all teens are going to be driven to some extent to want to try new things. So what's that going to look like? Now, the interesting thing about deviancy training, we can always assume that it's been somebody else who has drawn our teen into this behavior. But selecting friends, how do teens choose friends? There's cliques and crowds. Everybody can name. I think the funniest thing I had in a class once, I'm like, so what were some of the cliques in your high school? We have the jocks, and we have the geeks, and we have the stoners, and we have the, everybody's got their names. We have the skaters. We have the goth, blah, 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 so whatever these different kind of labels we give. And, and one student said, oh, the good looking guys or the hot guys. I'm like, how exactly do you get into that clique? I mean, do they run through the criteria? Anyway, I just thought it was funny. So selection and facilitation kind of is a two-step process that, of course, we're not thinking about when we're choosing friends. But teenagers select friends whose values and interests they share, abandoning friends who follow other paths. I certainly saw this happen. My sort of best friend and I in the 9th grade went separate ways. And I think some of it was I was very much a goody-goody. And I think there were things she wanted to try. I, in time, did some of my own risk-taking and stuff, but I wasn't, and at that point. And so we came back together, roomed in college. All of that was good and great, but we can see this happening. But I think what's interesting is that what it says, selection comes before facilitation. So at some level, when our teens are choosing friends, they're selecting those that either stir up that desire, the same things that they're going to be interested in or things that they want to try. Facilitation, peers facilitate both destructive and constructive behaviors in one another. Helps individuals do things they would be unlikely to do on their own. Some of those we would rather they not do. Some of them are going to be boundary testing that they almost have to do in order to learn, to grow, to make decisions and choices for their own moral, of their own moral values. And so then what about romance? Can't pass that one up. When do first romances usually begin? I have conversations with students about this in terms of what does it look like in elementary school, in middle school, in high school, these romances, and when does a real boyfriend girlfriend thing begin, and how do we define that? But I always love this. Girls have steady partners more often than boys. So who are they having, and granted, I know that there's different types of partners and so forth, but I always think that's kind of funny. I wouldn't have thought it was funny in high school. Breakups are very tough because of that audience, that imaginary audience that isn't so imaginary when it comes to this. It's like living in a very small town, a high school. Everybody knows who everybody's dating, and when something happens or what happens, it's like it's on the front page of the paper, it seems like. At like no other time in our lives. It's like we're all famous celebrities where everybody knows what's going on. So that's tough because it's not just because of all the hormones and everything, but it's also going on. So this is another area where I kind of offering some more updated information here. Are most teens having sex? So first ask yourself, do you think so? What do you think? So this is the study that I was looked at between 2006 and 2010. A study done between these dates included data collection from 4,662 teenagers and found the earliest teenager was 15 that they used. About 43% of never married female teenagers, 4.4 million, and about 42% of male teenagers had had sexual intercourse at least once. I think that's interesting. Actually, more females than males. These levels of sexual experience have not changed significantly from 2002. 78% of all females, so about half, had at least once. 78% of all females and 85% of all males used a method of contraception the first time they had sex, with the condom the most popular method. Well, good. Most, not all, and more males than females. Teenagers' contraceptive use has changed little since 2002 with a few exceptions. There's an increase among males in the use of condoms alone and in the use of a condom combined with a partner's hormonal contraceptive. A significant increase in the percentage of female teenagers who use hormonal methods other than the pill, such as injectables and the contraceptive patch when first having sex. So these are just some updated numbers. We're looking at almost half of teenagers between, I guess that would be 15 to 18, 15 to 19, because the study actually included 15 to 44, but this was for the teenagers, part of it. First sexual experience for the majority of teenagers was with someone with whom they were going steady. 70% for females, 56% for males. Hispanic female teens were less likely than white or black teens to have their first experience with someone they had just met. 41% of females and 31% of males who had never had sex gave as their reason that it was against religion or morals. Second most common reason for males, haven't found the right person yet. And this was a significant increase for males. For females, don't want to get pregnant and haven't found the right person. For those who had not had sex. So I'm really just giving you updated information. I'm not going to harp on a lot of this. Pregnancy. In the U.S., the birth rate for females aged 15 to 19 was 39.1 births per 1,000 females in 2009. This is a historic low for the U.S. We do see teen birth rates going down. Higher, though, than a number of other developed countries. The teen birth rate in Canada was 14, or about 1/3 of our rate. The rate in Germany was 10, Italy 7, less than 1/4 the U.S. rate. That I find really interesting, and I think brings the point of why. Why is it that the U.S., even though it's going down for us, what is it that here, because if you look, especially I would say, in a lot of European countries, sex is much, is approached differently, let's say, through the media, through education, and why is it that we're having the largest rates of this? You can think about it. I would love to have a discussion around that, and what you think the thing is. Could it be that our kind of insistence on keeping sex something that's not discussed with children, that's, keeping it as something to be sort of avoided in terms of a topic in our society, or seen as like bad? I don't know. Is it our societal, does it have to do at all with our societal attitudes towards sex that are much different than they are in other places in the world? They don't see as much sexual crime or, teenage sex. Sex and relationships too, in terms of, what is it that drives half of young teens to have sex? Well, we know we have the hormones, we have all those feelings. At a psychological and social aspect, what's going on there? STDs. Most recent estimates show females aged 15 to 19 continue to have higher rates of chlamydia and gonorrhea than any other age or sex group. Teenagers have the greatest amount of STDs across the board. Rates of syphilis among teenage females and males are lower than those of other age groups. These rates have increased every year since the early 2000s, though. Estimates suggest that while representing 25% of the sexually experienced population, those aged 15 to 24 acquire nearly 1/2 of all new STDs. So, what's going on there? I certainly can have some hypotheses around all of these things. One for this is that I think, education, of course, can be a problem, and how do we approach education in our schools? And again, this runs into people's opinions and judgments, and should we teach? When should we teach? What should we teach? One thing I think that is really missing maybe in our teaching, even if we teach facts, is we don't teach how to have really difficult conversations. We don't teach the emotional intelligence and the esteem that it's going to take for a teenage girl to stop in the middle, before sex takes place, to either say no, or to say, wait a minute, you have to be protected. Or the teenage boy, when in the throes of passion, to stop and make this choice. To make this choice be ahead of time. I would think a lot of these STDs have to do, and the pregnancies and the teenage sex have as much to do with our lack of agency and emotional intelligence as it has to do with anything. Of course, it has to do with our over-emotional brain, our very emotional, that emotional spark, and it has to do with maybe some of that invincibility, there's a good chance I won't get, So, but at the same time, what are the skills then that need to be taught, not just the information, in order to have these really difficult conversations before we even get to this point, or to make these decisions and feel okay about them and good about them before we find ourselves in a situation where we don't know how to change course. For young people, because that's just it's really hard with everything else that's going on for them, I think. There was something else I was going to say and I can't think of what it was. So again, I just think that this has a lot to do with skill building, emotional skill building, emotional strengthening, and communication skill building, as well as facts and information being given. We can't deny biology. We can't deny physiology. We can't deny those drives. We can't deny the neurology. This has all been evolved and put into us. And so we can decide how we begin to talk to teenagers about this, that will build their self-esteem, that will build their decision-making power, that will take those emotional sparks, that courage, that all of that that's good about the essence of adolescence, and put it into play in a successful way for them. What about same-sex romances? 2002 study of teens in Massachusetts and Vermont found 5 to 6% of teens had same-sex sex partners, had same-sex sex partners. 2010 study, nearly 10% of teens had. So this is an increase, right? So this is another trend we're seeing, another increase that might attach somewhat to our gender identification. Almost 1 out of every 100. This, when we go back to what is identity crisis in some of these areas look like, for sexual identity crisis, it can be a moratorium of exploring options, of not knowing and being sure, so trying different things. The research published in the journal Pediatrics looked at more than 17,000 teens in New York City. It found that teens who had sex with only their own gender or with both genders were more likely to engage in risky sexual behaviors, putting themselves at greater risk for sexually transmitted diseases. Now, be really clear on something. I am not, in sharing this information, I am not making any kind of judgment on any of this. Because I want you to read to the end here with me to understand what this is all about. What this is showing is that those that have had sexual partners of more than one sex seem to take greater risks sexually, getting more STDs, and so forth. So why is that happening? Risky behaviors include not using a condom and having forced sex. More than half of boys who engaged in bisexual behavior didn't use a condom, compared to 1/5 of those who engaged exclusively in heterosexual behavior. So this researcher, Elizabeth, I don't know how to say her last name, University of British Columbia, believes these teens may engage in riskier behavior because sex education programs don't always acknowledge gay, lesbian, or bisexual relationships. So even what we're getting in the programming and in the information, we haven't gotten there yet where we really have an inclusion and a discussion about this that includes all these different gender identifications. Some teens I've seen tell me that they completely check out of sex ed because they feel what they were learning didn't apply to them. She suggested that educators need to acknowledge gay, lesbian, and bisexual relationships more often in sex ed curriculums so that teens are more likely to listen and will feel more comfortable discussing any issues. This goes to where we are as a society in terms of this social movement, in this social opening. And it's going to look different in different places of the country, in different parts of the world. I'm just giving you what the research, and then what researchers might be believing about that. So, as we look at these. So how do teens learn about sex? Well, they learn from their peers a lot of times. And they learn on the playgrounds in elementary school. I hate to tell you. I've had students a lot ask, well, when is the right time to talk to kids about sex? Because we need teens. By the time they become teens, oh my gosh, let's hope to heaven they've already had this conversation with somebody. I mean, I know parents who have taken their children away for a weekend to have this, the same-sex parent take them away for the weekend to have this conversation, to answer questions. I know some who gave it very early on in terms of just information with all the right terms and stuff. I know some who don't want their children to know anything until they're, in middle school or older. So, it's, but here's the thing. They can go on Google and Google will tell them anything they want to know. So it does become the question of, do I want my children to know what I want them to know, or do I want them to know what Google will share with them? And I have a friend who had a friend whose 12-year-old came in, and maybe I already shared this story, and asked, Mom, I'm so upset. I'm so embarrassed. I Googled big boobs. Well, just imagine what's going to come up if you Google big boobs. Don't go do that. Well, you can't. But anyway, if you Google big boobs, you're going to get things that you certainly don't want your, 12-year-old, 13-year-old to see, much less your 10-year-old, 9-year-old. So, for me, it's always been about my son started asking questions when he was 3. So it's always been about answering the questions as they come, as honestly and age appropriately as I felt possible, and always stressing the idea of, I am here. I would rather you hear from me. If there's something I don't know and we need to ask Google, then at least I can ask that appropriately so that we're not going to have issues around that. But I would rather he know and have it from my value system than what he could get from anybody else. But they're going to hear it. They're going to hear it on the playground, and it's going to be, they're going to hear it in sex ed, which starts, I guess, typically around 5th grade. My son had first sort of steps in this year. And so whether or not, they're always going to find out. We just want them to find out what information we really would like them to know. And we have to assume they're going to find out. Even if we want to believe that they're not going to be active or have these feelings or whatever, we have to assume that they're going to hear the information. And that as peers become more important, and as this social comparison starts happening, and as this leading by peers example, then we might as well share the information. So all of this is just information from the text. But, you can ask yourself in terms of, what do you believe about sex ed programs? What do you believe about when to ask children this? What do you see is really working? When we look at the numbers and so forth, what's going to help us to reduce, well, one, certainly the amount of sex that is being had when it's not really wanted. And I'm not even talking about rape. I'm talking about people who don't know how to say no, who don't know how to hold up their agency in a situation, so go along. How do we give young people a voice? How do we give them something within themselves to value when they're having to go through those high school hallways and make decisions and choices, when there's so many things pulling them in different directions? So anyway, that's the end of this one.